Go ahead, leave, Olivia said, swirling the wine in her glass like she was bored of the whole conversation. You'll be back in a week, you always come back. The room went quiet for half a second, then her friends laughed like it was the most obvious truth in the world, like I was a punchline they'd heard too many times, and I just stood there, holding my keys, feeling that familiar pressure in my chest, the one that used to push me to explain myself, to fix things, to stay. But this time something in me didn't move, didn't react, it just settled. Like a switch flipping somewhere deep I hadn't touched in years, I looked at her, really looked at. The confidence in her smile, the way she leaned back like she already owned the ending of this story, and for the first time I realized she wasn't guessing, she was certain that no matter what she said, no matter how far she pushed, I'd still be there, still orbiting her like everything I was depended on it. And maybe that used to be true, maybe I did spend years proving to her that I wouldn't leave, that I'd bend before I'd break. That I'd choose her even when she stopped choosing me. But standing there in that living room, with the low music humming and her friends watching like it was entertainment, I felt something colder, clearer, the kind of clarity that doesn't shout, it just removes the noise. I nodded once, not to agree, not to argue, just to acknowledge what she believed, then I turned and walked out. No speech, no slammed doors, just the quiet click of the handle behind me. And the sound of their laughter fading as I stepped into the night air, cool and sharp. Against my skin, like the world had been waiting for me to notice it again, I got into my car and sat there for a minute, hands on the wheel, not starting the engine, not checking my phone, just breathing, because the truth was, I had already seen enough, the late-night messages she thought were hidden, the names saved under something harmless, the conversations that didn't sound like a mistake but like a pattern, a choice. A life she was building that didn't include me, and the worst part wasn't even the betrayal, it was how certain she was that I'd accept it, that I'd stay anyway, that I'd keep playing the role she wrote for me. But sitting there in the dark, I realized something simple and final. I didn't have to be that man anymore. I didn't have to fight for someone who treated me like I had nowhere else to go. I didn't have to prove my worth to someone who only measured it when it benefited her, and for the first time in a long time. I didn't feel angry, I didn't feel desperate, I just felt done, and that kind of feeling doesn't come with noise, it comes with decisions, quiet ones, the kind you don't announce, the kind you follow through on. I started the engine, pulled out onto the empty street, and drove without looking back. Because what Olivia didn't understand, what she couldn't see from that couch surrounded by people who only knew the version of me she allowed them to see, was that I wasn't leaving to make a point. I wasn't leaving to scare her. I was leaving because something in me had already walked away long before my body did, and by the time she realized I wasn't coming back the way I always had, it would already be too late. I drove for almost 20 minutes before I realized I had not turned on the radio, not checked my phone, not done any of the things I used to do to fill the silence. And that silence felt different now, not heavy, not suffocating, just clear. Like a room after someone finally opens a window. I pulled into a gas station off Route 9, the kind with flickering lights and a coffee machine that had probably been there longer than I had been married, and I sat there watching people move in and out like nothing in the world had shifted, like lives were still simple somewhere. My phone buzzed once on the passenger seat, then again, her name lighting up the screen like it always did, Olivia. But this time I did not reach for it, I just watched it ring until it stopped, then started again. And I realized something that hit quieter than anger but deeper than anything I had felt before. She was not calling because she cared, she was calling because something was out of place. Because I had stepped out of the pattern she depended on, and that was the first crack. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes for a second, replaying the last few months, the late nights she said were work, the way her phone never left her hand, the way she smiled at messages that were not mine, the way she had started talking to me like I was an obligation instead of a partner. And all the small things I ignored because I thought love meant patience, because I thought staying was strength. But now those same memories felt like evidence, like pieces of something I had refused to see. I opened my eyes and looked at my reflection in the dark window, and for the first time I did not see a man trying to hold everything together. I saw someone who had been holding on to something that was already gone. My phone buzzed again, longer this time, more urgent, and I let it ring. Because answering would pull me back into the same cycle, the same explanations, the same quiet compromises that always ended with me standing in the same place. And I was not going back there, not this time. I started the engine again, pulled out onto the road, and drove forward without a destination, just a direction, away, because the truth was, I was not trying to make her miss me, I was learning how to stop needing her at all. And that was something she had never prepared for. I checked into a small motel just past the county line, the kind of place where the carpet smelled faintly like cleaning solution and the air conditioner hummed louder than it should, and for once I did not mind any of it because it was quiet and it was mine, no expectations, no tension hanging in the walls, just a space where I could think without being watched or measured. I set my keys on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone as it lit up again, Olivia calling, then texting, then calling again. The pattern getting tighter, more urgent, like she could feel something slipping through her fingers that she did not know how to grab back, and I realized she was not confused about where I was, she was confused about why. I was not responding, because silence was never something I had given her before. I was always the one explaining, reassuring, fixing, and now that role was empty, and she did not know how to fill it. I unlocked the phone but did not open her messages, just watched the notifications stack on top of each other, each one a small signal of panic. And I felt something settle deeper inside me, not satisfaction, not revenge. Just clarity, the kind that comes when you finally see the pattern from the outside instead of living inside it. I stood up and walked over to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see the parking lot, a pickup truck idling under a flickering light, a man grabbing a coffee from the vending machine, ordinary moments that did not care about my situation, and that was the point. The world kept moving. It always did, whether I stayed stuck or not. I thought back to the first time Olivia told me I was lucky to have her, how it sounded like a compliment at the time, how I nodded and smiled like it was something I should be grateful for. But over the years it changed, the tone sharpened, the meaning shifted, until lucky turned into dependent, and dependent turned into controlled, and somewhere along the way I stopped questioning it because it was easier to keep the peace than to challenge it. Easier to bend than to risk losing everything. But now I could see how that thinking had built the exact situation I was trying to survive. I had handed over control piece by piece, decision by decision, until she believed it was hers by default. And maybe it was, until tonight. My phone buzzed again, this time a voicemail, and for a second I almost pressed play out of habit, out of that old reflex to respond. But I stopped myself because I knew whatever was on the other side of that message would try to pull me back into the same script, the same emotional loop where nothing really changed. I set the phone face down on the table and stepped back, creating physical distance like it would help reinforce the mental one I was building, and then I did something I had not done in years. I opened my laptop and started looking at my own accounts, my own schedule, my own options, not in secret, not in fear, but in ownership, line by line, detail by detail. I mapped out what my life actually looked like without her influence shaping every decision, and the more I looked, the more I realized I was not as trapped as I had believed. There were choices I had ignored, paths I had not taken because I thought staying was the only way forward, but it was not. It never was. I just needed to see it without the noise, outside the version of reality she had built around me. I leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that feels like the first real one after holding it too long, and somewhere between the silence of that motel room and the glow of the screen in front of me, I understood something that changed everything. I was not losing her. I was losing the version of myself that thought I needed her, and once that version was gone, there was nothing she could say or do to bring it back, and that was a line she would not even realize I had crossed until it was already far behind me. I did not sleep much that night, but it was not the kind of restlessness I used to feel. There was no anxiety pushing me to fix things, no rehearsed conversations running in circles, just a steady awareness that something irreversible had already happened. Sometime around 6:30 in the morning my phone lit up again. Not a call this time but a long message. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before opening it, and there it was, not an apology, not concern, just confusion wrapped in irritation. asking where I was, why I left, why I was ignoring her like this was somehow unreasonable, like I had broken an unspoken rule by stepping outside the role she assigned me. I read it once, then again, noticing what was not there, no acknowledgement of what she said the night before, no reflection, no ownership. Just an expectation that I would respond and restore the balance she was used to. I set the phone down and walked to the sink, splashing cold water on my face, letting the moment settle instead of reacting to it, because that was the difference now. I was no longer responding out of habit. I was choosing what deserved my attention, and that message did not. I grabbed a cup of motel coffee, bitter and thin, but it grounded me in the present, in something simple and real. And as I sat there by the window watching the early traffic roll by, I realized she was still operating on the version of me that no longer existed, the one who would explain, who would apologize just to keep things from escalating, who would come back because leaving felt impossible. But she had not seen the shift yet. She was still speaking to that man, and the more she reached for him, the more obvious it became that he was gone. I picked up my phone again, not to reply, but to silence it completely. And in that small, quiet action, I felt the control shift for the first time, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in something steady and undeniable, because for once, the outcome did not depend on her reaction, it depended on mine, and I had already made my choice. I left the motel just after 8 o'clock in the morning, the sky still pale and quiet like the day had not fully decided what it was going to be yet, and for the first time in years I was not rushing back to fix something. Not checking my phone every few minutes to manage someone else's emotions. I stopped at a small diner off the highway, slid into a booth by the window, and ordered black coffee and eggs like I used to before life became a constant negotiation. The waitress gave me a quick nod and walked away, and I sat there watching people come and go, construction workers in boots, a couple arguing softly over pancakes, a man reading the paper like time had not sped up around him. And I realized how long it had been since I felt this kind of stillness without guilt attached to it. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, then again. But I did not reach for it right away. I let it sit there. Because I knew that pattern. The escalation, the shift from confusion to frustration, and eventually to something else, something sharper. I pulled the phone out after a minute and saw her messages stacking, shorter now, more pointed, asking if I was serious. If I was trying to make some kind of statement, and I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it confirmed what I already understood. She still thought this was about her, about getting a reaction, about control. She had not realized yet that this was not a move in an argument, it was an exit from it. I set the phone back down on the table and took a sip of coffee, letting the bitterness settle, grounding me in the moment, and then I did something small but final. I opened my email and started making changes, updating passwords, separating accounts, setting boundaries that should have existed a long time ago, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of clarity, each step quiet, deliberate, like rebuilding something from the ground up without announcing it. And as I worked through it, I felt that same steady shift inside me, the one that did not need validation, did not need to be seen. Because it was not about proving anything to her anymore, it was about finally choosing myself without asking for permission, and somewhere between finishing that last update and closing my laptop, I realized something that made everything else fall into place. She was still waiting for the moment I would come back and explain, but that moment was never coming, and when she finally understood that, it would not be because I told her. It would be because there was nothing left of me in the place she expected me to return to by noon. The silence had turned into something heavier on her side. I could feel it even without looking, but eventually I did, just once, unlocking my phone and scrolling through the messages she had sent over the last few hours. The tone had shifted again, no longer confused, no longer irritated. Now it carried that edge I knew too well, the one she used when control started slipping, asking if I was ignoring her on purpose, accusing me of overreacting, reminding me how much she had put up with, like she was rewriting the story in real time to pull me back into it. And I saw it clearly now, the pattern I used to get caught in, the way she would push, then blame, then expect me to fix the tension she created, and for years I played that role without realizing it, thinking I was being patient, thinking I was protecting something worth saving, but sitting there in that diner with the noise of dishes and quiet conversations around me, it all felt distant, like I was watching someone else's life instead of being trapped inside it. I locked the phone again and set it aside, because responding would not change anything, it would only restart the same cycle. And I was done repeating it. I paid the bill, stepped outside into the late morning sun, and stood there for a moment letting the heat settle on my skin, grounding me in something real, something present, not tied to her expectations or reactions. And then I made the next decision without hesitation. I drove back toward the house, not to return, not to explain, but to collect what was mine, because leaving did not mean disappearing without direction, it meant moving forward with intention. And as I pulled into the driveway hours later, the place looked exactly the same from the outside, the same porch, the same windows. But I knew the moment I stepped inside it would not feel the same, because I was not the same man walking back in, and whatever version of me she thought still lived there, she was about to find out he was already gone. I stepped out of the car and stood in the driveway for a few seconds, the engine ticking quietly as it cooled. The house in front of me looking exactly like it always had, clean, familiar, unchanged, but there was a distance now that I could not ignore, like I was looking at a place I used to belong to instead of one I still did. I walked up to the door, unlocked it, and pushed it open, the same scent of candles and polished wood greeting me, the same quiet hum of the air conditioning filling the space, and for a moment it felt almost surreal how normal everything looked compared to how different everything actually was. Olivia was in the living room, pacing, her phone in her hand, and the second she saw me she stopped, relief flashing across her face for half a second before it tightened into something sharper, something defensive. She opened her mouth like she had been rehearsing what to say, but I did not give her the space to control the moment. I walked past her without a word, straight down the hallway toward the bedroom, and I could feel her following me, her voice starting behind me, asking where I had been, why I left, why I was acting like this, the same questions wrapped in a different tone, but I did not answer. I opened the closet and pulled out a bag, calm, steady, like I had already decided everything that mattered. And that silence hit her harder than anything I could have said. I could hear it in the way her voice shifted, the way the confidence started to crack, because she was not used to this version of me, the one who did not react, the one who did not explain, the one who did not try to fix what she broke. She stepped closer, asking if I was really going to ignore her, if I was seriously doing this over one comment, and that was the moment it became clear just how far apart we were. Because to her it was one comment, one moment, something small, something she expected me to brush off like I always had, but to me it was everything that came before it, every pattern, every quiet compromise, every time I chose to stay when I should have walked away. I zipped the bag slowly, deliberately, and finally looked at her, not with anger, not with frustration, just with a calm she had never seen from me before, and in that silence she realized something she could not argue with. This was not a reaction, this was a decision, and for the first time since I had known her, she did not know how to change it. I could see it in her eyes before she said anything, that shift from control to uncertainty, the way her posture changed like she was trying to recalibrate a situation that was no longer responding the way it always had. She stepped in front of me as I moved toward the door, not aggressive, not dramatic, just blocking enough space to force a reaction. And for a second we stood there in silence, the kind that used to make me uncomfortable, the kind that used to push me to fill it with explanations, but now it just existed, and she did not know what to do with it. She asked me where I was going, her voice softer now, less certain, like she was testing a different tone to see if it would work, and I picked up my bag, steady, unhurried, and walked past her without answering, because the answer would not change anything, it would only give her something to push against, and I was not giving her that anymore. Behind me I heard her follow, quicker now, asking if I was really leaving. If I was serious this time, and that word hung in the air. Between us, serious, like she had never believed I could be, like every time before had trained her to expect a return. I stopped for a moment at the door, hand on the handle, and for the first time since I walked in, I spoke, not loud, not emotional, just clear, telling her this was not about one night, not about one comment, It was about everything she thought I would tolerate, everything she assumed I would accept. And the words landed heavier than anything I could have said in anger. Because they were not a reaction, they were a conclusion. She tried to interrupt, to explain, to shift it back into something she could manage. But I opened the door before she could finish, the outside air cutting through the tension in the room, and as I stepped out, I heard her call my name, not with confidence this time, but with something closer to urgency, something she had not needed before. And I paused just long enough to understand what had changed, not her, not the situation, but the balance between us, because for the first time, she was the one trying to reach, and I was already out of reach. I did not look back when I got into the car, not because I was trying to prove something, but because there was nothing left behind me that needed my attention anymore. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb slowly, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror until it was just another structure on the street. And for the first time in a long time I was not thinking about what I had lost, I was thinking about what I had finally let go of. My phone buzzed again on the seat beside me, her name lighting up the screen. Over and over, calls stacked on top of messages. But now the pattern had reversed. Now she was the one reaching, the one trying to close a distance she did not understand, and I let it ring, not out of spite, not out of anger, but because answering would pull me back into something I had already stepped out of. I drove past familiar streets, places we used to go. Memories that used to feel like anchors but now felt like markers of a version of me that no longer existed, and somewhere between one red light and the next, I realized the weight I had been carrying was gone, not reduced, not managed, just gone, because it was never mine to carry in the first place. It was the weight of expectations I kept accepting, of silence I kept choosing, of boundaries I never set, and now that I had stepped away, there was nothing left holding me in place. My phone finally went quiet, the screen going dark as the calls stopped coming. And that silence felt different than before, not empty, not uncertain, but complete, like something had closed exactly the way it was supposed to. I pulled onto the highway, merging into traffic, moving forward with no plan except to keep going, and as the miles stretched out in front of me, I understood the one thing she would never be able to change. She did not lose me because I left, she lost me because she believed I would never reach a point where I could. And by the time she realized that was not true, I was already too far ahead to be pulled back.